Is it ever too late?
It is never too late. So if there's a desire to take ownership,
Indian family scenario where more often than not the relationship we have with our parents is very authoritarian. A lot of people think that trauma means something really extreme.
a lot of people, as you justly said, imagine trauma as like this huge event. But then you have a very subtle kind of trauma, which exists, I think, in every family. This child will equate love with screaming, punishing, because he's not at an age where he can say, oh, my mom doesn't love me, because he needs that love to survive.
The women are more open, they'd like to know more, they'd like to discuss more, they'll talk with their friends. The men are not.
Wherever there's drama, there's trauma. Men are stuck in their heads. It takes them more time to first commit. And then when they commit, it takes them much more time to get out of their head.
Have you ever reacted in a particular way and then wondered, why did I react like this? Do certain situations always trigger a certain reaction in you? Do you have certain fears that never go away? Do you repeat patterns even when you're fully aware of them? A lot of psychologists believe that the answers for this lie in our childhood, our experiences growing up, and the difficult people and the difficult situations we may have had to deal with. And that's where the idea of inner child and trauma healing comes in. In today's conversation, we are joined by Lilya Sabatier, who's done a lot of work helping individuals reparent themselves and also in the field of inner adulthood. Today's conversation is brought to you by Arc Oils, which is a premium cold-pressed oil brand well known for its purity and freshness. Before we go over to our guest for the day, may I please request you to hit the subscribe button so that me and my team are motivated and we keep getting you such good content that enables you to become the very best version of you. And now over to our guest for the day. Hi Lilya, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. I'm really happy to be here. Happy to be with you.
Thank you for being here. I can see a nice tan from Sri Lanka. Yeah. How was that?
It was everything that I needed, which is basically doing nothing, being at the beach, surfing, having coconut water. It was perfect. I just needed a really good break.
Lovely.
Before getting back to the work.
Lovely.
Yeah.
So, I did not try to over-explain what you do because I thought I'd let you do that. So, you mentioned helping individuals reparent themselves. So, why do you feel there's a need for that? Explain what you do firstly, and why do you feel there's a need for that?
So as you said, I help people reparent themselves, and it took me a really long time to understand that's actually what I'm doing in my work, because I've been doing it for a very long time, 20 plus years now. I was struggling to kind of identify what is it that I'm really doing with the people who come to me. What is that common denominator? And what I understood through the years is I provide a space for people that they probably never had in their life before, where they're unconditionally supported to move through really difficult things with a benevolent person who's on their team and who's really giving them unconditional support to go face themselves and grow and mature in whatever space they haven't matured in yet. So I help people by being like an external parental figure while they slowly grow their own capacity and move into what I call inner adulthood, which is the capacity to be your own parent, the capacity to take care of your inner world and to show up in the outer world from what I would say is an integrated space where multiple parts of you are working together as opposed to working separately and chaotically. Okay. So I think I'm just like a loving parent, and I'm like, yeah, you can do this, And a lot of the people that come to me have not had loving environments growing up. And they grew up in, there's a range, obviously, but what I see widespread across most of people's childhood is a lot of emotional neglect. And so people are not equipped emotionally to face life and adult life and everything that comes with adult life, including all the complexities of adult life. So yeah, I'm like a mom, or a dad, depends on the situation. And I walk with them till they learn how to walk on their own. And then they don't need me anymore. And if they have a problem, they can always come back. But generally they don't. Once they have that inner capacity and those inner resources, I don't see them again. And I'm very happy. I am like a proud parent. It's like, yeah, my kid went into the world and they're doing well and I'm happy. Yeah.
Just to help me and the viewers understand, how how might one realize whether one needs to be reparented? What are the kind of symptoms that might show up?
Everybody needs to be reparented.
Okay.
I mean, that would be my statement. I think anybody who's 25 plus, considering the kind of childhoods that we had and the kind of emotional capacities that our parents had, which is not great for most of us. Most people, I would say 25 plus, definitely need to work on their inner world because they didn't grow up in environments where there was a lot of understanding of trauma, of emotions, of what it means to be a parent who's present. Most people grew up in families where dad was not there. So I would say across the board, everybody needs it. But I think one of the ways to really understand if it's something that would be beneficial is to look at where there's drama in your life. So I have this sentence that I coined that wherever there's drama, there's trauma. And because I noticed that in my life was super dramatic while I was growing up because I had so much unresolved trauma. And as I started to move through it, resolve it, and, through many, many different things, eventually my life became really boring. Like there was no drama anymore. There was no like upheaval and struggle and, like these kind of Bollywood movies. So if your life is like a Bollywood movie where there's a lot of drama,
It's not a good thing.
then you definitely need to do some kind of inner work. Then whatever shape that takes is up to everybody. There's so many options to choose from.
There's so many names popping up in my head right now of friends and people in my
Hey, I'm
circle.
here. Yeah.
Um, you know, you mentioned Bollywood movies. So, which brings me to you. You're of mixed parentage, and I'd like to talk like about the Indian sort of society or the Indian family scenario, where more often than not, the relationship we have with our parents is very authoritarian, right? So, what are the kind of things that you've noticed in Indian society or in Indian adults that you feel would need work?
So I think it varies depending on the gender, because I think gender roles are still very strong in Indian culture, and
Yeah.
obviously depends where you are, south, north. I mean,
Yeah,
India is
that's
such a
strong.
big country
Yeah,
with so
that's
many subcultures. So I'm gonna generalize, but I obviously know that it's a generalization, and there are many nuances to what I'm gonna say. Um, I think the thing I see across the board is that people here are educated to be obedient. And so there is an inbuilt obedience to authority, whether that's the government, that's your parents, that's school. There is no culture of defiance, which you have a lot in France, for example. So the French side of me is, in France, we're known for revolutions and, always going on strike because we're not happy with this or with that. It's even a joke in Europe, right? But so I think India is kind of on the opposite end of the
Yes.
spectrum, where there's a lot of obedience and there's a lot of subservience to the roles that are given and prescribed. And there's also a big weight that comes with that. And I have seen it in all of my Indian clients because the majority of the people I work with are Indian. There's a real struggle when it comes to family. I think the family pressure here is huge, and it creates a lot of tension within the family system, but also within individuals in the family system.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I think the family factor here is something that's really different than in other places. And I really, this thing of obedience, is something that's very strong here. And I think a lot of people are suffering because of it also, because in obedience, there's also suppression. When you're educated to be obedient, you're not educated to think critically, to push back, to say no, to say, wait, that doesn't make sense. I mean, why am I doing this thing? Like, why, why am I accepting that my mother-in-law is treating me like this? So I think there are faults with every system has its flaws. I think the challenge with obedience is that you don't have much space for self-expression or even self-exploration. And so my clients, predominantly my Indian clients, they really have a lot of family drama going on, a lot of family dynamics that are heavy, especially with the whole in-law situation, which you really don't have in Europe anymore because nobody lives with their in-laws, nobody lives with their parents even, right? But here, when you get married, a lot of people still live with their in-laws, joint
Or they're closely
families.
connected, even if they don't live.
Yeah. And that brings in so many dynamics, so many dynamics that a lot of I would say a lot of my female clients struggle with the pressure of those family dynamics.
Yeah, yeah. Lilya, a lot of people think that trauma means something really extreme, right? But that's not necessarily the case. So, what could we qualify as trauma? Since we spoke about, since we spoke about the inner child and trauma healing, right?
So, for example, if I were to ask you what's trauma for you, like what would you say?
Oh, a lot of things. I think I definitely have. I could reparent myself a little bit for sure. I would like to, and I think any kind of, it sounds very contrary to say that considering the profession I'm in, but any kind of public spotlight or public pressure is not really a happy place for me. So
Okay.
yeah, that's
Really?
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, because you're literally, that's what you do, right?
Yeah, I'm a very private person, so it may not look like that. So I don't know if I could qualify it as trauma because I have met people with much deeper scars, whether it's abuse scars or things like that. And I also think, I don't know if it's a India thing. I think we are not taught to recognize emotional abuse as abuse in some ways. But yes, I've met a lot of people who've been through emotional abuse. So
So I'll tell you what my definition is, and I would invite whoever's watching to really do research on trauma and trauma healing because I think it's the need of the hour. Um, a lot of people, as you justly said, imagine trauma as like this huge event, car accident, or you get physically abused or something big happens and there's a before and after and it's very clear. I would say that that kind of trauma is it's not going to sound right, but it's the easy trauma. What I mean by that is it's easy to identify. Yeah, this horrible thing happened.
this incident or whatever.
Yeah. So it's very clear what it is. But then you have a very subtle kind of trauma, which exists, I think, in every family. But it also depends on the individual and how they're experiencing what is happening to them. But for example, for a child whose entire life depends on his or her parents, if there is any form of rejection, that can create a lot of childhood trauma. If there's any form of emotional neglect,
Yeah.
same. Emotional abuse, same. And emotional abuse is widely spread in India still. I'm just thinking of this example. I'll give you a very simple example. So in my building, there's this family that lives next to me, and there's this little boy. Maybe, I don't know, maybe 5. Okay. I don't know how old he is. But so one day I was in my apartment and I was hearing this like really loud screaming from this child. And I was like, what is going on? Because from inside, it felt like something was being done to him or he was in distress. So I opened the door and I see him and he's in front of his door. And he's crying and banging the door and kicking the door with anger. And he's basically trying to get his mom to let him in. I didn't really understand what was going on because they were speaking Marathi and I can't speak Marathi to save my life. But I could see something I was feeling inside, this is not right. I don't know what this is, but this doesn't work for me. So I asked him, I said, what's going on? You need help? And I said, no way I'm leaving this child outside the door. So I rang the doorbell and I said, what's happening? Why is this child outside? And she's like, oh, he's not listening to me. So I sent him out. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, okay, but no, like you can't leave him outside. She's like, okay, and and then I could hear her shouting in the house.
At him or whatever, huh?
So that's a form of emotional abuse.
Yeah, he's going to remember that when he grows up.
So it's not, he might remember it, or what will happen is this child will equate love with screaming, punishing, right? Because he's not at an age where he can say, oh, my mom doesn't love me. Because he needs that love to survive. So that's how it can be really difficult to identify, because we're conditioned from such a young age and things are happening and we're not really aware they're happening. And then years later, we have stuff going on and we don't really understand why, because we were not really aware of what was going on, because we just thought, oh, this is what it is. It's not so bad. I didn't get abused, So it's not that bad that my dad was never home, or that if I came home with less than an A, they were like, oh, you just got a B, So I think the challenge with trauma is a lot of people diminish the things that actually hurt a lot when you're growing up, because the only thing you want when you're a kid is your parents' validation.
Yeah.
That's all you need. You need their love, their support, their validation. That's all. As a kid, you don't need anything else. And it's a really primal need of survival. So when they don't give it to us, it can be really, really challenging to grow up. And most people never grow up, actually.
And then it leads to all kinds of patterns that you have in your relationships, whether it's with your near and dear ones, or whether it's gender, like a male-female relationship, or with your friends. I've seen that. There's some patterns people have, and that's what they kind of grew up with.
We all have patterns. I think the question is, are they helpful or are they destructive? The challenge is most of us have very destructive patterns, because everything functions in patterns in life. There are patterns to everything, even in nature. So it's not about escaping patterns. It's about becoming aware of them and how they are influencing us. So I use this example of, imagine that you're you, and then there's a pattern. The pattern is not you. The pattern is, you can imagine it like an entity who's living through you. And like you, it wants to survive. And so the pattern will do whatever it needs to do to survive. And patterns are extremely intelligent. Like, I call them intelligent beings. Because when you start working with them, you think, oh yeah, I'm done with that pattern, and then they show up differently. They become more and more subtle. But everybody has patterns. The idea is we learn those patterns through observation, observing our environment. And we see, when you're a kid, you don't think about life, you feel life. So there's no filter. You don't have the consciousness to think of, oh, dad did this to mom, this is what it means. You just see, dad did this to mom, this is how it feels inside. If he's screaming, I'm feeling scared. So for the first 7 years of your life, you're just feeling everything. And that's how you're relating to the world. And you're imprinting yourself with what you're seeing modeled. So I can tell you something, but if I'm acting differently, what I'm saying has no, it's not going to have any impact on you. So the question of patterns is not so much who has them. We all have them. There's nobody who's exempt of patterns. It's just, what are our patterns? What are they rooted in? Are they rooted in love? Are they rooted in fear? And if they're rooted in fear, those are the ones we really need to work with, because those are the ones that are destructive.
Okay. So what are the patterns that you have seen a lot of, which are rooted in fear, maybe, that you worked with?
I would say any pattern that has to do with control. Control is rooted in fear and lack of trust, right? So anywhere where we're controlling, tight, rigid, there are definitely patterns there to look at. Anywhere that basically wherever we feel we don't have agency, like things are just happening, And we're like, oh my God, again, I dated the same kind of person. Oh my God, again, I did this in my job. Wherever there's repetition, you're 100,000% there's a pattern there. And there's a pattern you're not aware of. And you just think, oh, but this is life. This is who I am. This is not who you are. This is who you've learned to be through your life experiences, etc., etc. And I think one of the most fascinating things for me when it comes to patterns that I discovered through my work is 90% of the patterns my clients have don't belong to them.
Okay, explain. What do you mean by that?
So in some of the work that I do, we go back to the parents and to the grandparents, and we kind of look at the lineage. We don't need to go so far back. Just grandparents is fine. And we try to see, okay, what happened? So we take, grandpa, grandma on one side, grandpa, grandma on the other side. What was their life? How did they meet? Their relationship? What happened to them? The children? And so as you go through everybody's life, then my client's parents' life, then you get to my client and you realize everything my client is struggling with, either some parent was struggling with or grandparent was struggling with. So this pattern now, because it hasn't found resolution, because nobody stopped and checked it, it just keeps going. It found the next host, right?
Okay.
And it's like, okay, like a virus, let's say that, right? It's like, oh, I have a host. Cool, I can continue living. So when you look back just 1 or 2 generations, you can see that the pattern is already there. And it's just looking different, but it's the same pattern. So a lot of the patterns are rooted in scarcity, fear, greed, control. A lot of our ancestors went through a lot of difficult things. So that comes through the lineage. And epigenetics is also showing now that the DNA of people who've gone through trauma changes and it's passed down. And so you could have emotional reactions that you kind of inherited through your DNA, that because your ancestor was in a situation that changed their DNA. Now that's being transferred to you, and you may have these trauma responses, but you actually never were in a traumatic situation.
Wow.
So it's it's a really vast subject. I'm a geek about this stuff. So
No, it's amazing
go
because
on
I
and
knew,
on, but yeah.
No, I knew depression and alcoholism, there is a gene for that which can be potentially passed on, right? So you can be more prone to being depressive or being, alcoholic if it's there in your family. I did not realize that you could react to patterns, and that's something that could be passed down from generation to generation as well. So I'd love to talk more about this. So Lilya, you mentioned this word right now, what did you call it?
Epigenetics.
Okay. So Lilya, you mentioned this word, epigenetics. What is that? I haven't heard it before.
So I'm not an expert on it, but basically epigenetics is a field of science that is studying genes and how the genes, basically what happens in the past, can be transmitted genetically and have an effect on the descendants. So that's the field of work that is discovering that actually trauma that happened to our ancestors can modify the genes, and then those genes are transmitted to us, and we may have residues of that trauma even though we've never experienced that trauma. So genetically we're carrying that trauma because that trauma at some point changed the gene expression. I find that fascinating because of the ramifications of what that means. Because if we look at our history, our collective history, for sure, there's trauma in all of our cultures. There's been so much war, mass rapes and pillaging and colonial. I mean, there's everywhere you look, for sure, you're going to find that there's trauma. I don't think there's any civilization that has been spared. So if really it is affecting us on a genetic level, that means if we look at where we come from and our lineages and what has gone down in the lineage, we can have an idea of how that's affecting us today, even though we were never there, right? And I find that really fascinating and in a way also unifying, right? That means we all have something in us from our lineage that was difficult.
Yeah. I think That's really interesting. We just speak about it, I think, on a more superficial level. That we tend to talk about, oh, XYZ is this race, so they are hardier, or we just talk about it on a more superficial level. We don't talk about it that perhaps it's had some kind of genetic modification, and hence we are a particular way, or whether it's trauma or otherwise. Um, so since we talk about trauma, what could be some of the ways that one can tell that there is inherent trauma within?
Okay. So I think some of the simple ways to see is, for example, hyper independence. Like I can't rely on anybody. Like I have to do everything by myself on my own. There is nobody else I can trust in this world. That is not normal. That is not healthy. That means somewhere we learned we can't trust others. That means somewhere when we needed support, it wasn't given to us. So we learned that we cannot receive support. So you know what? Instead of putting myself in a situation where, again, I'm going to try and reach for support, it's not going to be given to me. I'm just going to be my own little independent island, right? So, for example, hyper-independence, as I was saying, hyper-vigilance. Your body constantly in fight or flight because you're constantly scanning the room for potential danger. That means you lived in a chaotic environment where maybe your dad could come in at any moment and start screaming, or your mom could whack you if you made a mistake in your homework, right? So now you're constantly scanning every situation in your life to be like, is it going to happen? Am I going to be safe? Am I safe? Right? So it's this kind of restless energy. If you're constantly restless, that means your nervous system doesn't know how to relax. Shallow breathing, chronic pain, gut issues, sleep issues, all of these, I'm not saying they are, but they can be unprocessed emotional trauma. Other things like, for example, having compassion for others but none for yourself, right? Being extremely hard or judgmental with yourself and or with others. So those are some of the ways you can get a sense of, well, maybe there's something for me to look at here. There are many more, but these are just like, I would say most people, they're really hard on themselves. They judge themselves a lot. They're super critical. If you have a really strong inner critic, there's something there to look at, because that inner critic is fulfilling a job of protection. I mean, I don't want to get into that because otherwise I can go into the whole protector and pattern. But
No, go ahead.
like if you have a very strong inner critic, which, for example, a lot of my clients have or had, it works as a protective mechanism. What does that mean? That means that if I am criticizing myself, then it doesn't matter what anybody else says because I'm anyways doing it, right? So nobody else can hurt me because I'm hurting me. But in that critical voice, it was initiated somewhere. So who did it belong to? Who does it remind you of? Who does it speak like? What tone does it have? And who does that tone remind you of? Right? And generally they say, oh, my mom. Oh my God, yeah, it sounds like my mom or my grandpa or the school teacher I had at. And then you realize that, okay, there was an outer critic, which created a lot of shame for this being here. And so for this being to avoid shame, they started internalizing that voice, which is a brilliant mechanism. Because if I'm hurting myself, you can't hurt me.
Yeah.
So it's such a brilliant protective mechanism. If you think about it, we're designed so beautifully. But it's still harmful because you're believing that voice, which is actually trying to protect you from other people harming you, because at some point it did harm you, but now it's working against you. So that's when you would start working with that voice, because now, when you're past that time where things were going on, then now you can choose differently. Now we can look at, okay, what happened? What created this situation? Now let's move away from that because you're no longer in that situation. But for some parts of us, they're still in that situation. So, for example, one of the things I tell my clients is, for example, I'm going to be 40 this year, right? 40-year-old Lilya wasn't there when 5-year-old Lilya was going through whatever she was going, or 15-year-old or 20-year-old Lilya, right? She's here now, but she wasn't there then. If she had been, oh my God, it would have been a totally different story because I can be fierce. But 5-year-old Lilya, 15-year-old Lilya, 20-year-old Lilya, they're still here. They don't go anywhere. right? So they're still with us. The difference is now we are here also as an adult to be able to take care of those younger parts of us that maybe didn't receive what they needed, weren't treated the way they needed to be treated, maybe were abused, whether emotionally or physically, were abandoned, rejected, bullied, whatever it is that they went through. We weren't there when that happened, but now we are. So now we can make it right. We don't have to wait for anybody to make it right for us. We can do that work. And that's the work of reparenting that I talk about. We become our own parents. So we stop waiting for our parents to be the parents we wanted them to be. And we can accept them for the parents they are.
We spoke about reparenting.
Yeah.
I do realize it's a process, but can you tell us a little bit as to how do you go about it, or how can one go about it?
Yeah. So I think the first step is always what I would say, kind of waking up to something. I don't know what's going on, but something is, I'm feeling something's off. We have that feeling that something in our life is waking us up saying, look at something needs to change here. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is bringing things into awareness. If we're not aware of things, it's very difficult to change them. So if I don't know that I have this pattern, if I don't know that I'm doing this thing, if I don't know that this behavior is because of this, whatever, I'm just doing it and I'm thinking, oh, this is who I am. So the first thing is separating the idea of who I think I am with who I actually am. And that's one of the most challenging processes, because we adapt to survive and we grow up a certain way and then we're like, this is who I am. Well, maybe, but maybe not. So the first step would be bringing everything that you think you are into awareness and questioning it. Am I really that? Or did I learn to be that because nobody showed up for me? And so I became this hard, like tough person. So you want to look at who you are with a lot of honesty. And I always tell my clients, your growth, your ability to change will be equivalent to your ability to be honest with yourself. The more you can look at yourself honestly, and sometimes it's really hard. When you do this journey, and I've personally been on it in my own life for 20 plus years, it's really hard. There's some things you see about yourself, about your family. You have to be willing to see the truth. And that can be really hard because sometimes the truth is really painful. And so we design a lot of fantasy around it so we can stay with the illusion because it's less painful than the truth. So one has to be ready for the truth. One has to be ready to be very honest with who they are, who their parents are, who their family is, what actually happened to them. And then with that honesty, it's about taking complete responsibility and ownership of your life. And I think that's a really difficult step. The honesty one is the first difficult step, but then saying, okay, well, nobody's coming to save me. Nobody's going to do anything with this stuff. Like, okay, it happened. Okay, this is where it led, but now it's on me. Do I want to do this or not? And that's where courage is required. And that's really, a lot of this work is about taking full responsibility for your life. And I think the most challenging part for a lot of people is, how can I put it gently? I think the most challenging part is to decide that we're not a victim. Because what happens is when things happen to us at a young age, at that age where it happened, we were a victim because we didn't have agency, right? When we're a child, we don't have agency. So in that moment, it's true. If something happened to us in childhood that was difficult, we were a victim. We were victimized. We were put in a position of where there was power play. And it's true and it's fair. But when you're 30, 35, 40 plus, you're not a victim. The idea is you have to decide to step out of that victim narrative of poor me, my life is horrible because of this trauma, I can't do anything. And I'm, basically using trauma as an excuse to stay stuck and small in life. And it's a very tempting, seducing narrative. I know because I was there for a very long time. I lived from a place where I blamed everyone and everything, and life was unfair, and God didn't love me. If you look on the victim spectrum, I was like victim mindset plus 10,000. So I know how hard it is to let go of that narrative, especially when we feel justified in our pain. And I'm not saying we're not justified in our pain. I'm just saying at some point it doesn't serve us to hold on to being justified to our pain. It serves us more to say, hey, you know what? It really hurt, but I want to live my life. I want to enjoy my life. I want to feel alive and excited and creative again. I don't want to go through life carrying buckets and bags of pain and trauma. So I think honesty, so awareness is the first thing, honesty, then taking full responsibility for one's life, moving out of this idea of there's nobody to blame, not anybody else, not ourselves, moving out of this blame victim mentality. And then there's what I would call emotional maturity, which is, I think, a tricky one. I feel we live in a very emotionally immature world, and that leads to a lot of complications in our relationships. Whatever the relationships, doesn't matter. They don't need to be romantic in nature. And I think with this process, we become more emotionally mature because we're able to hold more of complexity, more of nuance. And I think that's what makes us capable adults, when we're able to hold our truth and other people's truth, and all of them are valid and welcome. And we're no longer struggling to me, has to be me, my truth. I need to be the center. And that's a very childlike way of living life.
Right. It's so interesting when we planned this podcast, right? And whenever I've spoken to anyone about this, the ones showing the most enthusiasm and interest are the women, right? They're always interested. They want to know more. They're like, oh, tell me more. Or they will call me and give me feedback. Hey, I saw this. I loved it. She spoke so well. This resonated with me. The ones who are not engaging, or at least appearing to not engage, are the men. And according to me, I think they need more inner work, because the women are at least open to the idea. That is my feeling I'm getting from this forum, that the women are more open. They'd like to know more. They'd like to discuss more. They'll talk with their friends. The men are not. So what is the kind of, how should I say, gender patterns you've discovered differently, or you've experienced differently in your work? Because in men, they seem to close up, or, I don't know, react in a different way. So what has been your experience in dealing with female clients and male clients?
So what I've noticed is that generally my female clients are super decisive. They want to do the work and they're like, let's go, and they're going to go deep. They go wherever we need to go, we're going. The men, they're like more hesitant. They'll contact me again. It takes them more time to first commit. And then when they commit, it takes them much more time to get out of their head. The men, and I don't think it's just my clients. I think it's in general. And I love my clients. I'm always rooting for them. So there's no judgment in anything that I'm saying. Men are stuck in their heads. And it's really difficult for them to come out of that and explore other things. And what I mean by other things is their emotions, their physical sensations. They're very much disconnected from their emotional life and from their physical body. Now, I want to put a kind of a love message to the men out there, platonic love message, is I think right now that we're, as a collective of men and women, and all, genders and binaries and whatever everyone wants to associate with, I think we're in a really decisive moment in our collective history where there's a lot of polarization. There's a lot of man versus woman versus man. There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of women not wanting to tolerate men anymore, certain behaviors. And I get it. And I am, and I was one of those women. It's just like, okay, guys, enough. Please grow up. I beg you, do the work. I'll pay you to do the work. Just do the work. But I have to say that I have a lot of compassion for men because I always try to remember that we were all children once. And my understanding, and what has been also shown and proven scientifically now, is that boys are actually much more fragile than little girls. They're much more emotionally fragile in their growing up years. They need much more emotional care and attention. And I can feel it makes me a bit emotional because I have a deep love for children. And I consider all of us were children one day, right?
Yeah.
Including the men who are grown-up men today.
Yes.
Or actually look like grown-up men, but are emotionally probably still little boys. Is that most little boys didn't receive the emotional care that they needed. They didn't receive the emotional language that they needed to understand what is going on inside of me. So they don't know how to express because they don't have language. So, for example, sometimes you can ask a guy, hey, what's going on? I can say, I don't know. And we think like, what do you mean? Like, come on, are you angry? Are you sad? Are you, and they literally don't know. It's not that they just don't have the language because no one modeled it for them. And if you think about the little boys who are now men, how many of them had fathers who were emoting, who were expressing emotion, who were modeling to them what it means to be a man, an emotionally available, present, capable man? Probably 1%. These are my statistics, okay? But they're not like proven. But so there's no model out there that they can look up to. So how will they learn? And so I always try to bring compassion into it, even though there are very real topics that we need to be able to discuss between the genders and really hash it out and say, you know what? And fight with each other, but stay engaged with each other, not against each other. But I really have a lot of compassion for my fellow men because we need them. We're not, I think we're living in a time where a lot of women are single, are choosing to be single. And some of the women are single because they're not finding men that they feel are capable to meet them. So there's a real challenge. And I think the challenge is not between men and women. It's between us and a system that doesn't serve us and a system that is making us fight each other instead of cooperate with one another. I feel like, men's work is really growing in India, and I'm part of that movement in a way. It's taking shape. There are men's gatherings, men's circles. A lot of stuff is starting to shift in this space. So I'm happy to see more and more of my clients are men. That's also been a shift over the last few years. So I'm really excited for that because I think the population that is suffering the most on the planet is men. And because they're suffering so much, all of us are suffering so much. And so my happiness and freedom is tied to their happiness and freedom. And I don't want to separate myself from them because I know that if they're not free, I'm not free. So, and a lot of the pain that was inflicted to me in my life was inflicted to me by men. But I also know because of the work that I do that those same men were also hurting, right? You have that very famous cliche saying, hurt people, hurt people. Healed people, help people heal, right? And so I'm just diverting for a sec, but there's this lady in the U.S. who does work in prisons, and I think it's called the Compassion Project, and I found her video on Vimeo once a few years ago, and basically what she does is these trauma healing circles. Okay, and there's this in the video. She's doing this trauma healing circle in a maximum prison facility in the U.S. Okay. Huge circle outside in the compound, and there you can see all these men, black, white, Hispanic, doesn't matter, tall, old, all kinds of men. And what she does is basically they all stand in a circle because the circle formation is the one of where everyone is equal. There's no hierarchy.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, so you stand in circle. We're all equal in a circle. There's no beginning, no end, right? So then she starts reading these statements. If you have ever been insulted, between the age of 0 and 7 by a family member, step inside the circle. So you see the men stepping inside the circle. If you have been beaten up so badly that you became unconscious, step inside the circle. And she's saying all these affirmations that are just more and horrible, one after the other. And you see all these grown men stepping inside the circle. And what you realize is, even if you look at prison population, prisoners are the most traumatized population on the planet. All of these people step inside the circle because they've all been through horrible traumatic events growing up, emotional abuse, emotional neglect, rape, violence, and when you see that, you can't unsee it. You see what I'm saying? Like, you have to acknowledge that people are not born a certain way. They become a certain way. There is nature, but there's also nurture. Naturally, I will have an inclination. But depending on how I'm nurtured, I will go in one direction or the other. And I think the challenge that we have in our cultures is that there is no nurture, especially emotionally. We're not nurtured emotionally. How many of us feel safe in our homes? How many of us feel safe with our families? How many of us have been said, I love you, regardless of our grades or what we do or don't do? How many of us have been, unconditionally supported? How many of us have been protected from harm by other members of the family or other people outside the family? So if we don't feel safe in our homes with the people who brought us into this life, where do we feel safe? And how do we grow into capable adults if we are not nurtured? It's really hard. So I know it's hard because I wasn't nurtured. And I love my parents, bless them. They did the best they could. But I didn't feel nurtured. And so I was growing like a plant, but I was growing like this, I was not blooming into this beautiful whatever tree. I was growing with whatever I had. So I understand the consequence of nurturing and how much it impacts us. And I also see that if we start nurturing ourselves, if we become the parents that we never had, then we can start to bloom in ways we never have before. And that's where resilience and hope and dreams come into play, because I never expected to be the woman that I am today or to do the work that I'm doing today. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. There's nothing that anybody cannot overcome. There's really no trauma that is fatal or final or that has to determine your entire life. I really feel like if we learn how to be the parents we never had for ourselves and for each other, then we would live in a very different world. Yeah, sorry. I got so excited. I mean, I'm just so passionate about this stuff because I see so much suffering, because of all of this. And I feel like we live on such a beautiful planet and we're just creating so much pain and destruction because we're in pain, So I always try to go to the root cause. I don't look at the symptom. For me, war is a symptom. What's the cause? What's the pain underneath that? What's the trauma that's there? Physical illness, symptom. What's going on? What is the unresolved emotional pattern, challenge over there? Relationship, patterns. Okay, that's the symptom. That's life saying, hey, look here, you're doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. Maybe if you want to learn, let's go and figure out what's causing this. If you take care of the cause, you don't need to focus on the symptoms. So that's what I try to do. And I feel that that's where the world needs to move. We live in a very symptomatic culture. You go to the doctor, you have a headache, take a paracetamol. Okay, but why do I have a headache? What is it? I can numb the pain, which is what we've learned to do.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah?
We have.
We've all learned to numb and distract. Or I can be like, wait, why do I have pain? My body is so beautifully designed to heal itself and function optimally. Why is it not? What's going on that's causing this disruption in the system? So yeah,
Lilya, we were just chatting right now, and you mentioned a really nice example where you spoke about a scientist and rice. So I want you to tell the viewers what. I think it's really cool.
Yes. So basically, I'm not very good with retelling exact stories. So this is my recollection of it. Basically, I think it's a Japanese scientist, and people can Google this. who did this experiment with rice. And basically, he had, I think, one jar of rice where he would every day go and say like loving words to that jar. And then he would have one jar of rice where he would go and say horrible things to, like, whatever, you're useless, you're not growing, you're ugly, whatever. And then the third jar of rice, he wouldn't say anything. It was just neutral. And so what he observed over a period of time is the first jar that he was saying loving words to remained like fresh. It didn't deteriorate in any way. The second jar that he was saying horrible things to, it was rotting, and it was rotting much faster than the jar that he was being neutral with, where he was neither saying anything positive nor negative. So I was just thinking, when I came across this study many years ago, I was just thinking, I was like, okay, if this is the impact of nurturing or no nurturing or harm, right? Rather, like nurturing, harm, neutrality, right?
Right.
You can see that harm and neutrality have an effect. The rice starts to rot. It rots at different speeds, but it's still rotting. And that same rice, the same, right? With love and nurturing, it stays the same. It doesn't start the process of rotting. And I was thinking, okay, if this is happening for rice, then what is going on for us when we're being nurtured or we're not being nurtured and we're being harmed, and or when we grow up in very neutral environments where we're neither harmed nor nurtured? And that got me like into a whole loop of thinking of the impact must be so deep and profound that we don't even realize it. Because, I mean, if this is happening to rice, imagine what's happening to us, right? We're energy beings. So whatever is being given to us constantly is going to affect us. And that for me was just like a moment of, oh my God, like, yeah, and how am I treating other people? Am I contributing to nurturing them, or am I harming them, or am I neutral? Because neutral and harm, they're not the same, but they can be the same. Sometimes when you remain neutral in a harmful situation, it can be harmful, right? So it really got me thinking about my own behavior. And how am I nurturing myself? How am I talking to myself? What am I saying to myself every day? What am I saying to the people in my life every day? How am I showing up for them? And then I also looked in my family. Wait, how was I treated when I was a kid? What was said to me? And then I was like, oh, okay, I get it. So I think it's a really simple example to understand how profoundly we are impacted by the things that happen or don't happen in our life. And sometimes trauma is actually the things that never happened that we needed to happen. And that's the one that's the most difficult, because we feel like, well, it wasn't so bad. I wasn't beaten. Nobody abused me. It's fine.
It's just a different kind of abuse, maybe.
The things that we needed that we never got, they're the most difficult to overcome, honestly.
I think they're difficult to understand, then difficult to overcome.
Yeah.
So I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm asking this on behalf of the viewers who are out there who've been listening to this, where a lot of what you've said has resonated with them, right? What do you think? Firstly, is it ever too late, or are the patterns too formed? And don't say yes, it's too late.
Yes, it's too late. There is no hope.
No, you can't. So is it ever too late? And secondly, what can one expect in terms of changes within yourself and maybe in your immediate environment if one reparents themselves the way they would have liked to be parented?
More than liked, I would say needed to be parented.
Needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe
It's something that they needed that they didn't receive. So I would start by saying that it is never too late. I think the only time it's too late is when we have decided that it's too late. If we are willing, it's always possible, because the first step is always the person wanting something to change. If that person doesn't want something to change, I could be the best at what I do, I can't help them. So if there's a desire to take ownership, take responsibility, stop harmful behavior, stop repeating patterns, stop feeling sorry for oneself, stop wallowing in misery, and really take responsibility for one's life, then anything is possible. One of the things that's going to be needed on the journey is patience. compassion, and a lot of courage. A lot of courage. And I would say also a lot of discernment of who do you choose to surround yourself to do the work, surround yourself with to do the work. Because there are a lot of people out there. You need to find the right person for you. So it's never too late unless one decides it's too late. The second thing is when we start to do the work of reparenting ourselves, what essentially that means is growing up emotionally. We move from being emotionally immature and living like a child in an adult body to actually being an adult in a grown-up body. We're no longer just, this little kid who looks like an adult. We're an adult who also has a little kid inside. That's a big nuance. So I'm just trying to make sure I say it in the way that it's easiest to understand. I would say the first thing that one can hope for is feeling much less emotionally reactive.
Okay.
So when you start the process of reparenting, you start to see all the things you're projecting, all the stories you're believing in, all the things that you think are true, but you're just actually making true in your own narrative, and you become less and less emotionally reactive. There's less fighting going on because there's more calm inside. One of the biggest shifts is you realize that nothing is ever personal. Nothing anyone says, nothing anyone does is ever about you. When you live in an emotionally immature state, you take everything personal. They said that, oh yeah, it's because they don't like me. They didn't call me back, oh yeah, maybe I did something wrong. When you're in emotional immaturity, you take everything personal and everything is about you because a child is the center of the universe. And that's how it is. When you're a child, you are narcissistic. What you want, when you want, it has to be now. You're the center. You're the mom. I want your attention, dada, right? But when you grow up, you're not meant to be like that anymore. So that's going to be one of the biggest changes is you will stop taking things personally. You will be able to see people's behavior as a reflection of who they are, not as a reflection of who you are. And so you'll have enough space to see that, oh, this isn't about me. Oh, my mom's saying that thing. It has nothing to do about me. She's scared about that. It has nothing to do with me. And she's projecting her fear onto me. I don't have to take it. I can just be like, hey, bless you. You do you, I'll do me, right? So you stop being as reactive emotionally. You stop taking things personally. Those are you're much more comfortable being who you are, owning your mistakes. You're less likely to be reactive and defensive, so you're less likely to go into conflict. If someone gives you feedback, you'll probably be like, yeah, that's true. Yeah, I wasn't very kind that day. I apologize. You won't be like, no, that's not true. What do you mean? No, you were not kind to me. That, right? So all of those theatrics of performance, of having to uphold some kind of mask or all of that kind of fades away in the background. You're just like, yeah, I'm an imperfect human. I'm doing my best and I messed up. I apologize. What can I do next time to avoid hurting you with my behavior? And so you're more willing to learn, to listen, to make space for other people, to make space for their reality, to not make yourself the center of the universe, So that's there. Then there's, you're able to be much more discerning. So there are a lot of things that shift internally, but essentially you feel less shame, less guilt. Shame and guilt are very strong and present when we have a lot of unresolved emotional stuff going on or trauma or childhood stuff. So that kind of disappears. You don't really feel shame for anything anymore. That's a big, big one because it takes up a lot of space. And ultimately, then you start to see a shift outside. So now you're not living your life from outside in. You're not focusing on performance, achievement, whatever. You're really focusing on, how does this feel for me? Do I really want to do this? Do I like this person? Do I want to be in this relationship? So you're constantly questioning internally, and from an internal space, you're making an external decision. And what happens is over time, your relationships start to shift because when you change, your environment has to change. If your environment changes, there's a constant feedback. So if you start shifting in your family, for example, so it's happened to me that one of my clients is doing the work. They're in a marriage, for example, and they start to change. The marriage has to adapt because they are changing. Now the relationship has to adapt. And what often happens is then the partner comes for sessions, right? Because now they're like, oh shit, I need to adapt, but I don't know how, I don't have the skills. So then the environment starts to shift. What I've noticed is the more I move into what I call inner adulthood, the more I take responsibility for everything that is going on inside of me, the better and more capable I am to show up in life, wherever I am in life, and to own whatever is going on. And life becomes much more calm and peaceful, and I would say mature. I think you feel a sense of maturity when you've gone through this reparenting process, where you're like able to hold complexity. If you're in black and white thinking, for sure you're in a younger part. Black and white is not maturity. There is no black and white in maturity. In maturity, you understand that there's nuance, subtleties, complexities, that a person is not just one thing. They're this, but they're also that. And you make space for all of it. So those are some of the ways that life changes.
Potentially changes.
Yeah. You have healthier relationships, you have more honest friendships, you have, sometimes different relationship with your family members because you're not triggered anymore, you're not reacting anymore, you're not participating in the family patterns anymore. You're just being there and you're accepting and allowing people to be who they are. You're not trying to change your parents anymore. So it's just much simpler, honestly. There's something that came to mind when you were just talking right now, which I feel for me is personally as Lilya is really important right now because of the wars that are going on in the world. At some point I was feeling really hopeless about, what can I do as an individual, as a citizen with all the stuff that's going on in the world right now. And one of the things and why I'm so passionate about this work is really, I believe that there's no distinction between the inner world and the outer world. So whatever we see outside is a symptom of whatever's inside. And so if we want to change the world, right, we need to look at it as it is right now and understand that everything that we see outside is a symptom. And as I said earlier, right, like I'm always interested in the cause. So if this is a symptom, what is the cause? And so the cause is always found inside of us, each of us individually, inside of our families, inside of our relationships. So the conclusion that I came to is that if I want to contribute to stopping war, and it's really hard to think of because I feel powerless in a way, but I need to focus on the war that's inside of me. Where am I at war with myself? Where am I at war with my siblings? Where am I at war with my parents? Where am I at war with my community, with my partner? Wherever I'm at war in my life, that's where I need to bring peace. Because if you look at world peace, it starts in the family system. It starts in small communities. If there's peace in the family systems, that keeps rippling outwards. So the family system is an extremely important system in collective healing. Heal a family, you start healing a community, society. I mean, it's just, so I try to always focus on the cause. And this is my call to everybody and anybody. This is the time to show up. This is really the time for us to do our work, to learn these tools, these practices, the things that can help us to be more peaceful within and more peaceful with each other. It is really now. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like the house is on fire and we can either watch it burn or we can show up and figure out how to put out that fire. And I think that starts inside of each of us. That's why I'm so passionate about what I do, because I have seen the changes in my own life and how much I have been able to grow in my inner peace and the peace in my relationships. And I've become a much more healthy individual. And I've seen the transformations in my clients' life and how it's transformed their lives, and the relationships that is transformed in their life. So I know it's possible. It's just, it needs to scale. It's like that fire needs to reach much more. Yeah. So that's something I'm super passionate about because I think it's really needed.
Thank you so much for this. This is, one podcast that I was actually looking forward to, and I'm glad it's turned out the way it's done. And before you go, we have a small gift.
Ooh.
So this is a cold pressed premium oil brand called Arcoils.
Amazing.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, great. Okay, cool. I love coconut oil. So I'm super.
I'm glad.
Thank you.
So today's conversation was one I'd really been looking forward to, and it did not disappoint. I hope you enjoyed it and you got as much out of it as I did. It was a really deep, meaningful conversation, and I hope it helped you in some way. Don't forget to comment and tell us which part you enjoyed the most, and please keep coming back and looking at my channel for more such good content. Thank you for watching, and see you all next week.